Welcome back to the Weekly Boost podcast. This week, just Austin and I, but I'm really excited about this episode. I don't know about you.
Yeah.
A lot of things kind of catch up to us here. You got March basketball starting up. Conference tournaments for women's and men's about to get going. But we were talking before we started recording here. This is like the anniversary of when the NBA first started to get postponed and canceled. You were saying it two days ago.
Something like that. It was 2 or 3 days ago. Rudy Gobert tested positive for, SARS-CoV-2 and kind of sent the world, at least the Western hemisphere, into a frenzy.
Yeah.
And the trickle-down effects happened much more rapidly than we anticipated. And then I think this week, or probably later this week or next week, is the actual anniversary when we got sent home from classes.
For you guys. I remember the state of the baseball team, what that looked like when we were in that week leading up to Florida. Everybody's, we were super excited, right? We're going to Florida. I actually could go as a coach that year. Head off for work and everything, and then next thing you know, that's
done.
canceled. But I think for me, that whole thing was like, okay, there's a case in Fond du Lac County. If you're from Wisconsin, you kind of can gather where that is. And that kind of made it closer to home. And then it wasn't until, and the guys, if you guys are listening to this, you remember the night before, like we were all getting packed. Like I remember I didn't pack because I had a feeling we weren't going to end up going. But finding out the Thursday before the Friday that you leave that you aren't going to be going. And then everything's still up in the air because it wasn't like the season was canceled quite yet. Everything kept getting pushed off. I remember, don't talk with your hand in front of your mouth, man. I just remember that it was a crazy time, but then, flash forward a year. Right. And I got my first dose of the vaccine this past week, which we're going to talk about it because it was a really streamlined process, and we're going to talk about some other interesting things we kind of saw when researching vaccines as a whole with this. But getting out of my car to walk into this health the vaccine distribution point and realizing that's less than a year for a novel coronavirus to get a vaccine, an mRNA vaccine as well, for a virus that resembles somewhat the common cold in its class of viruses. Correct? Am I correct with that? Like it's a corona. The cold is kind of similar to, or no? Yeah. I'm sorry, I'm stumbling over my words.
Just to kind of clarify, we are infected with coronaviruses all the time. It's like the rhinovirus and the coronavirus are the two major causes of the common cold. And fact check here: the cold is not bacterial. I will repeat that again. The cold is not bacterial. I'm not an expert in this, but it's something that I've spent a good amount of time looking at. I've taken several courses, either be it microbiology, immunology, or my directed research program right now. There's that big misconceptions I'm happy we're dealing with that. It's unfortunate that we had to learn that the common cold is not bacterial through a pandemic, but the misconceptions needed to be squashed. But today's episode kind of starting off with a little bit of a directed science project, I guess. We're gonna just talk about the vaccine because, now the 3 types of vaccines that have been emergency use authorized in the United States. But for me as a amateur immunologist, right, when you talked about the mRNA vaccine and how that we a little over a year made something that could practically grant us immunity, don't know how long yet, but from something that caused the world to shut down. And the idea that it came from a vaccine type that 5-10 years ago we thought was something purely out of a science fiction novel makes me happy as a scientist, because it just shows the amount of progress you can make on something if unfortunately if there's more attention brought to it. But at the same time, when we all put our heads together in a collaborative effort,
Yeah.
Look what we can accomplish. And you can only imagine to put that into perspective of other things that we could do, like climate change, jobs, establishing jobs, like all these sorts of problems that we are facing as a human race today. This sort of set a pretty good gold standard for if you come together as a world, which we pretty much did. We had data coming in from countries all around the world about variant types popping up, which we'll talk about in a little bit, from vaccine distribution plans that have sort of emulated themselves within countries that sort of have a grasp of what's going on, as well as things that didn't work, right? Like you have states right now lifting mask mandates. It's kind of, we're still, as a scientist and a member of the scientific community, we're still a little hesitant about that, because their ideology is that if we're starting to see things turn around now, why are we limiting ourselves still when, we're having the vaccine to continue to roll out? You're seeing death cases and cases in general decreasing over the 30-day period from when we look at these things. And so you start to see what actually can happen and what can get done when people, and when I say people, I mean every single person on this planet, they can do when they work together. It's incredible.
Yeah, it's to get some of these vaccines ready to go by the new year, right? I think a lot of those
they
were approved. I think Pfizer was approved, in January there at the end of December. And to not jump through or skip over any parts that were needed in the clinical trial process.
Yeah.
And granted, the long-term effects, or if you will need a booster shot, all those things are getting worked out. And I saw a video somewhere today that talked about how some of these these companies are going to be still pursuing if booster shots are needed to protect against different variants. But essentially, what an mRNA vaccine does, injects you with a harmless piece of its genetic material, a spike protein, and your body is able to recognize that spike protein. Well, not recognize it produces things that is able to recognize that protein, right? This is your overview of vaccine, right? I just got done reading a book about the history of medicine, so it's it's kind of interesting to see that kind of come full circle. And again, from the CDC, this isn't, mRNA vaccines aren't new by any means. They're new in the way that we are using them, but they were studied in the past to see how some of those things work. So this is, again, one of the first that comes about, but it's really interesting. And I want to ask you, generally the scientific community accepts this as no, but do you think viruses are living?
Yeah.
You do?
Well, you want to know what they are? An obligate intracellular parasite is technically I think is the definition of what they are. So they can live on, obviously you see instances of infection where they're living on surfaces that should not be, able to allow them to survive, right? Like just your tabletop, like viruses are, on the table, but when you become infected with them, they sort of turn into this whole like living organism, even though they're technically living, but it's hard to explain because they're not free living. That's the kind of where the difference lies. Like where you compare bacteria and viruses, bacteria almost always have the ability in some environment, wherever they're found, have the ability to quote unquote live. They can survive and they can do sort of anything on their own, unless they are obligate pathogens where they can only survive with a host. Then that sort of gets into that territory of like the pathogen idea. But we're filled and riddled with viruses all the time that don't infect us, but they live with us and all that sort of stuff.
So this is again, just a quick Google search pulls this up, and there's like seven things or 7 categories for a living thing, right?
Yeah, like growth, replication,
growth, maintaining homeostasis, where viruses can't do that. Different levels of organization, which that passes because they have their own genetic material. The reproduction thing, like you talked about, is iffy, right? Because you need a living cell to do that. Viruses, to me, are that anomaly that's very interesting to study and learn about it. And it turns into these vaccines that, like I said, when I received it, besides a sore arm the next day, I'm anxious to see what the second dose brings, because that's typically where you get your reaction. But why don't I talk about that process a little bit? Because I know we both are in states right now that are kind of paving the way for the nation.
As of the past couple of days, the data that's come out of our states is pretty promising, considering, I don't want to bring in politics to this, but considering the the divide in, the process of distribution, the idea behind the efficacy of the vaccines, all that sort of stuff. It's remarkable that we have two different states, Oklahoma being particularly red, and Wisconsin being a nice purple. A nice purple, right? It goes to show that maybe, just maybe, politics doesn't necessarily have to be involved in everything when it comes down to human life and like wanting to be better in the health standard as well as it's just, for me, it makes sense.
The most I'm going to do that again, where it's like the most heavily politicized. I'm doing it, dude. COVID-19 has been politicized to a point that it didn't need to be, right? And I talked about it in previous episodes, where it's this moment for a lot of generations, or as a nation, that really can unite or divide. And evidently, as we've seen, it's divided. But like we talked about, the scientific community and research institutions that are able to create something in less than a year that is going to protect population, that with reinfection and everything and herd immunity, that was all unknown. But vaccines are effective in preventing further infection. So to see that has been interesting and remarkable, like you used, and to see where that goes now in terms of further researching things like mRNA vaccines or other public health measures that can get solidified in public practice. It'll be interesting to see where that goes. But anyway, I'll get back into my experience. So does Wisconsin have like an online portal yet, like a statewide portal where you can like sign up for appointments?
If they do, I have not been introduced to it, because I am clearly not an eligible recipient of the vaccine yet. We've kind of set a pretty good standard of who should get it first. There's obviously some gray area that I think could go either way. I know plenty of people that I think just people that come in contact with a lot of individuals on a daily basis should be prioritized. I don't think it necessarily sometimes I think we should look at that data. I know, like, frontline workers, obviously, without a doubt, people coming in contact with the possibility of infecting it. But like, I don't necessarily come in contact with a lot of people on a daily basis. I have a lot of choice in the people that I see. So that kind of distinction, it makes sense for me. And like, I'm okay with it. I'm going to get it sooner or later. And I know I'm going to get it. But for the people that I do know have gotten it, they have just told me that they were contacted through, I think, health services, like this state health department and stuff like that.
Or like through a doctor.
Like
their doctor if they're eligible.
And like, I follow, obviously, on certain platforms, I follow like the places that I get my primary care from, and they have things about like, hey, if you're eligible, you'll be getting a postcard, or you'll be getting an email or something posted to your just for an example, my Aurora portal thing. So like, I think for me it goes, well, for Wisconsin, I think it goes through the hospital administration a little bit more than it does the state. I could be wrong. I haven't gotten any of the information, so I don't particularly know.
Again, don't take our word for anything.
Yeah,
we're not experts. We're
we're experts on the experience of life and like what we've experienced. Let's just say that.
An expert.
Not even that. No.
We're not like
I was trying to build our credibility a little bit.
Not like Patty, who's 20 whatever and figured it out, he said. But anyway, Oklahoma has a state portal that we were able to fill out a questionnaire, register, and mark the boxes that apply to us. So if you're an essential worker, as deemed by like the 3rd executive order, if you're part of the K through 12 community or even college. That was included if you're an educator or working in that type of setting. Just questions like that. If you have comorbidities, things like that.
Yeah.
And then they will send you an email when it's your turn. So I think it's broken up into 4 phases. So we're in 2 moving to 3, I think. Regardless, I got my email that I was able to book, and I've had that email for, my girlfriend's had it for a couple weeks. And unfortunately, every time we look within, 50 miles, there aren't any appointments. Yeah. So that part was kind of frustrating because, you're finally eligible for something that you want to get.
Yeah.
And evidently you aren't going to end up paying for it. But, finding that appointment in that place there's tons of vaccine distribution centers, locations, but it's just that constant refreshing or checking every day that was, tiresome. So I ended up finding an appointment, 20 miles from me. And I get there. I believe the National Guard was on hand to help, streamline the process and everything. And, I had an appointment for 12:30. I was out by 12:51 or something like that.
Wow.
It's because you had to wait for 15 minutes for observation. Everything was, like I said, streamlined. It was easy. There wasn't really much of a line as long as you had an appointment. You have a QR code, you get it scanned, and then you go to the next station and you get scanned again. And then next thing you know, the vaccine's already in you, and they're like, okay, go sit in any open chair, and you got to stay there for 15 minutes. So that was like really refreshing to see. And again, that's just my experience. I don't know what some of these mass, using Yankee Stadium as a vaccination center or things like that, but this in a more rural setting was really easy to get through, which obviously makes it better for everyone involved. And then they have you sign up for a check-in. So like I don't know who the organization that sends me the link for it, but they'll say, okay, like, how are you feeling today? And they'll keep doing that, 3, 6, 9, 12 months down the road. So it's, again, like I'm super excited for everyone to start, getting those vaccinations. My grandparents just got their first dose on Friday. And they're in Wisconsin. So it's, like we said, it's moving along, and, hopefully by May, I think that's what the president had said, that we'll have enough, doses for everyone, which is, again, it's already, March 7th when we're recording this. So.
Yeah. And like, I can just remember, because it was about this time that when we were sent home, and the whole idea of like, we don't know how long this is going to be, and we still really don't know, but the horizon has become more bright and, more clear, with the prospect of becoming vaccinated against something that we only just discovered a little over 15 months ago. Like, that's about when we saw the first couple of cases pop up, as confirmed by sources, international and domestic. But for me, as a pretty big immunologist, and hopefully continuing my studies in this sort of field, I get a lot of questions asked, like, to me, about like what I know or how I can shed light into this sort of thing. And I wanted to bring up the idea of just how crazy the mRNA vaccine development process, and how fast and efficable we were able to do it. You have individuals that are terrified because of how quick it came to be, and rightfully so, with anything. We don't know the future of anything, because obviously we live in the present. You can't predict anything more than, the forecast really is in your future. Like, there's things you can project, but you don't know the certainty of it. And one of the biggest questions that I got was, how can you trust something that only took roughly 11 months to develop? How can you trust something with your life, not knowing long-term consequences, that it will prevent you from becoming sick or giving the sickness to others? And my simple answer to this, and this is just me speaking from a culmination of experts on the topic, as well as just people that have experienced it, is are we really certain of anything that we put in our bodies and how it will affect our future? Like it as bluntly honest as I can be, you sit down and you're drinking, you know, the newest Bang energy drink. I'm just going to use that for example because I tried it recently. It was like one of my first time. How long has that company or that drink been established in comparison to, you know, a 30-year, like it's like a fraction of it. So we have no clue the things that we're putting in our body, the long-term effects, because when you make something new, you can't study the future effects of it until it's been, you know, streamlined and incorporated into the process and consumed over and over again.
Yeah.
And we have vaccines injected in us every year for the flu. And I say people because I myself at one point was skeptical of the flu vaccine because I've gotten the flu vaccine and then got the flu the same year for a strain that the flu vaccine was not made for. But at the time I didn't know that was the case. Mm-hmm. And so I think the biggest thing that we need to do as a community, regardless of education background, is just do your due diligence and read about this stuff. Find a trusted source. What I think what we're going to do is put some of the links that we were kind of founding in our description, but just surround yourself in information that isn't media biased, that isn't agendified. If that's even a word, I'm going to make it a word today. But I've been a scientist practically my entire college career. Like that, I knew from day one that I'm going into the sciences. And so one of the biggest things is primary research and understanding how to look at information that is biased and information that uses, for example, the passive voice or information that just seems to only reflect actual data, right? Yeah. Not information that has somebody's opinion. That's okay sometimes. That's warranted, especially out of an opinion of an expert. But when you have, you know, John and Jane on Facebook saying whatever their experience, I'm nothing against that, but it's not primary research. And so I think just the best thing to answer that question is if you don't trust the information that you're being led into believe and told, do the research for yourself and find the actual evidence. Mm-hmm. And I did that all the time with this, and day in and day out, I use that to back my arguments for why I'm for the vaccine. And for me, it's a no-brainer just because I'm a scientist and it's like, this is pretty darn cool. But I can see why people are skeptical of it because what do we know the future of anything that we do? But sometimes you just gotta do your due diligence, read, understand the importance of it.
Trust the science.
Make a decision. It's not that hard. Like I didn't know that science was such a big controversy. I know the money behind science sometimes can be corrupt and cloudy, which I get. But in the bottom line, unless people are just going out there and faking data across the country, millions of data points, I don't think how plausible that is.
Who's gonna, and science as a whole is a really competitive industry as well, right? Especially when you get into pharmaceuticals and things like that, and competition for grants and things like that. There's checks and balances in place.
I was just going to say there's internal checks that are at play that aren't like controlled by an outside source. It's competition. You're exactly right. Just competition.
And that's the nature of a lot of things that go on in our society that's competitive. And media is another one, right? The whole clickbait thing and trying to take advantage of people's fear and intuitive nature as well. Right, because you're led down these rabbit holes of videos or articles, and they just keep feeding. And we talked about with the social dilemma too. Like they build off of what you're doing, your behavior anyway. Mm-hmm. So something like conspiracies around the vaccine and all that, like it's just gonna keep going. So
like I think the infertility conspiracy. I'm gonna talk about that for a second. Yeah, like how it wasn't used to obviously observe in the clinical trials. Well, first and foremost, in clinical trials, we don't touch pregnant people. It's just not that is not a cohort that you look at because there's we don't even know, like during pregnancy, there's like a 2-week span. I was talking about this with you before. There's a 2-week span of that where we physically don't understand the development of the embryo. Like we don't know because we've set standards that we don't look at this sort of stuff because it's unethical. There's points in which that we don't know. So obviously we're not gonna test. We barely even give pregnant people water in cohorts. We don't even have them apply for the trials. That's just bottom line. And so
I worked in it. Like,
this stuff. Yeah.
Before you get admitted, there's a pregnancy test a lot of times, or like if it's a drug that won't necessarily affect it, like they'll be asked, and then it'll be like a urine or a blood test for hormones and stuff, and you go from there. Like that doesn't, and measures are taken even during when they're in house to make sure they're separated from male, males and females are separated. Like we said, there's checks and balances in place that, granted, people shouldn't not question things. I won't say that,
I still question it, but I know that there's not going to be concrete evidence in a clinical trial because we don't look at that. Like you can't look at that. It's just unethical.
But again, that's like you said, surrounding yourself in good information.
Yeah.
And making sure that you are, I say this a lot, like in control of your own learning.
Yeah.
And feeding yourself the right types of information.
It's important, and we don't do it enough. And it's unfortunate that it takes something like this to sort of, I don't want to say unmurky the waters, but kind of bring forth the idea that if you want to be educated about it and know what you're doing and know what you're talking about, you need to be able to figure out who is saying unbiased information, like who is saying stuff that isn't an agenda. That's the hard part. And it's super hard.
And it's hard because everyone has an agenda, right? Writers of articles, they're trying to, be successful there. But science, if you fudge the data, it's going to come out.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh right? Yeah. Trust
Everything
me,
is peer reviewed.
Oh yeah.
And it's not like you're the only thing working on a specific experiment. Like you may be working on, like in your case, how bacteria affects this one species of fish. Mm-hmm. But if you have some outrageous data, you're going to repeat the experiment, or you're going to, or someone else at a different institution is going to like read that when it, gets peer reviewed and be like, hey, wait a minute. Like that's not,
that doesn't seem like it's right. Exactly.
Like, or ask you about it, and you'll be able to figure that out because you need to have, your notebook or whatever is your recording, spot for your data available. And again, like we said, it doesn't mean go blindly into something and say like, well, we trust them, but it's this information age that everyone, like the degree of patience, I feel like is just gone. So they want to know bottom line. And a lot of really intelligent people do that anyway to get to the bottom line of something. But the skills of being able to find your information and be reliable in it need to, stay.
This kind of stems from that idea. I don't know how many times you did this. You probably did. You're a student like myself. The first thing you do when you're searching something is you go to Wikipedia. Like you just type in something on Wikipedia, right? And like a lot of the times, unfortunately, the search stops there. Yep. And just because it's quick, like it's a fast information dump. But you go down to the bottom and you go to the references, and then you can click in and all that sort of stuff. That sort of culture, I guess, needs to be brought to light. The idea that the quick, easy answer almost always is missing information.
There's something missing from it.
Something. Sure. Because like you could say, like when we're talking about the question, are viruses living or not?
Yeah. Yeah.
You could say yes or no to that question and have information missing that could lead that question into the other direction.
Yep.
But because you see something where it's like, are viruses living or not? And you're like, oh, well, it doesn't do this, so it can't be. But you see how like it.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where we can't just take the 50-50 yes or no and just be okay with it. We have to, and that's sort of on us, not like just us, but just it's on us as people.
It's your fault.
Yeah. as communicators, as people of research, and as people of just civilianship, just need to come together to just be able to realize that, hey, fast information doesn't necessarily mean correct information.
Yeah.
And that's hard.
It is difficult, especially when you're trying to, budget your time and,
like this episode.
Yeah, that's true. I wanted to circle back, and we'll link this, but you had sent me an article about COVID variants and how we hear all this about, the UK variant, or and all these other variants that are being found in New York and wherever else. And I had, alluded to the idea of a booster shot and how everyone, might need to be injected later on with this other mRNA spike protein. I just think it's really incredible how one nucleotide can do, like one mutation can cause a greater rate of infection or more symptoms or more hospitalizations. I just think that's really intriguing. One nucleotide flipping. It's nuts. I don't know.
Well, I love looking at this sort of stuff because for me, it's like the biological version of code for a computer, like programming a computer, right? You're looking at just sequences of either letters, well, obviously either letters, A, T, C, G, or U sometimes, but also the amino acids for, the development of proteins and stuff like that. And being associated with science and like having gone through biochemistry courses as well as immunological courses and stuff like that, knowing what those letters mean, it makes sense, right? Like when you see certain amino acid changes to different, I'm looking right now on the paper when you see like a valine, right? Like a change to a valine, like the structure is fundamentally different, obviously causing a conformational change in the protein folding, all that sort of cool stuff. Yeah, you're going to get a different result if that protein is required for either virulence or viral replication, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
What I love the most about the paper that I sent you, obviously I'm a little biased to it, but at the end they talked about the opportunity for the variants to be missed by this vaccine, or the opportunity for them to not be missed, which I sort of liked because you see that in today's media coverage of the vaccine. Well, it's like, are we going to need booster shots? Well, I almost positive we are, because like the flu, even though this is a little different, the vaccine distribution may be a little similar, because the flu, every year we have 3 main institutions come together. I think it's Australia, New Zealand, and not New Zealand, Hong Kong. I might be completely wrong. We're going to cut this part out. It is in Australia, Tokyo, and I think London are the 3 institutions that come together and determine the strains in which we're going to vaccinate against for the flu. I don't, the places might be wrong, but I know it's 3 major institutions.
Regardless, right? There's like an administration that comes together.
There's
collaboration there.
Yes. And so they go based off of previous year statistics as well as projections, and we all know how projections go. They're very hit or miss, and they pick, right? And so there are countless strains of influenza because the virus mutates so rapidly. They've talked about it in this paper. Coronavirus, or SARS-CoV-2, has about half of the mutation rate of influenza, which when you look at it, influenza just mutates like crazy. It's a 7-segmented genome, kind of all over the place with mutations.
What does that mean? What does that mean? 7-segmented genome.
So it's in segmented, it's in different like chunks. There's 7 different spots for it. And so
like as in their genetic material, there's like 7 different areas essentially.
I think of it as in like there's, instead of one piece, there's just 7 pieces cut up of that one piece. So
and then that comes together to collectively be there.
Yeah. In the viral package. And from my understanding of it, could be wrong.
No,
that's from what I've learned. And it's up to chance. Like we may pick one year 3 of the 4 that are actually around in the human population, and we're going to be like, hey, that was a successful year for the vaccine because we got 3 of the 4 strains that infected people primarily. Well, like my first example that I talked about early on in this episode, I got the flu shot. I got the flu. Different strain from the vaccine that I received. And you know what? That happens. We can't vaccinate against the flu and cover all of our bases because the dang thing mutates all the time.
So often.
Now, getting back into the coronavirus, which is just it's a beauty to work with because you're looking at all these sorts of new, these old techniques incorporated into a new, analyte, I guess, in a new sort of form.
Sure.
And I think we were talking about the program starting to become available for emergency use authorization in January for the vaccines to roll out.
Yep.
And before that, we were getting news of variants coming up from different countries, and we were getting nervous because we're like, well, okay, this vaccine is already in clinical, stage 3 clinical trials.
Yeah,
the work is practically done for it. And this paper goes in to say that, well, even though that happened, the mutations were actually covered in the clinical trial for some part, like somewhat, not all of them, but efficacy still remained high when these variants were tested, as well as when the serum, but it's Sera, or is it Sera? I don't know. It's the plural of serum, I'm pretty sure, was tested, and obviously efficacy was still relatively high. But the idea that booster shots are probably going to happen is, I think, just the normal. We get booster shots for a lot of stuff. You get a 10-year booster for tetanus. Like people don't bat an eye at that because who wants to get tetanus, right? But it's one of I'm gonna say it's one of those things. You just gotta just trust the science on it. That was my flapping gums moment.
No, and it says, it's preliminary, and like the video I had seen earlier today about retransmission after getting the vaccine, and how that's pretty low too. Again, it's preliminary and more research is necessary. And as millions more are being vaccinated, we'll be able to see some of those things play out. And like you and I, it's interesting to see this unfold in our lifetimes, and a pandemic of this nature, and how unfortunate it is. But let's get into our break. I know we said we wanted to keep it kind of short, so we'll get in the second half here and come back with some more uplifting stuff, I think. Kind of. I don't know.
I agree.
So if you follow along on Instagram, you notice, we shared, how are you celebrating Hockey Day in America today? It's a 10-year anniversary, I believe. They kind of started this initiative in 2011, because there's Hockey Day in Canada, and there has been for years. So if you're watching along, you'll see I'm wearing go this way, camera's this way. I'm wearing an older Milwaukee Admirals jersey from Mike Liambus, game worn. And then Austin is
I'm wearing weekly boost apparel, but
that too. That's
I do have my Sabres cap on. I was going to throw the jersey on, but they kind of got their tails handed to them today.
Yeah.
And it's something about me buying a sports team's apparel, and then they start going down the poop.
Yeah, you got the magic touch.
Yeah, not good. Nah, the cheese touch, bro. Yeah. That's what I got.
But no, I think it's a good day to reflect on USA hockey programs in general. But that's not the direction I wanted to take, because we spend a lot of time talking about hockey. So I was at Target a couple weeks ago and came across, I'll put it in the camera, that issue of ESPN did a tribute on Hank Aaron. And you can see that the Admirals, this side, cameras are hard.
They
are. The Admirals have a partnership with the Milwaukee Brewers. So that kind of ties into this as well with Hank Aaron's history with the city of Milwaukee. But he, talking about vaccines, a couple weeks before he passed away in January, publicly got a COVID vaccine along with other leaders of the Black community, as a way to show that, encourage the getting of vaccines. Because as I'm kind of going through my studies, and just from what I know in the past, the amount of trust, like we say, trust the science, the amount of trust that the African-American community has with the scientific community has been really influenced by some things in history, but it hasn't been good, to say the least. There's plenty of stories of, well, you look at the Tuskegee. Oh, it's replaying. You look at just some of the historical experiments done on African Americans and things like that, and there's reason for the distrusting of the scientific community. But I guess I just wanted to shed light on Hank Aaron as a person. It's one of those things with Alex Trebek where you don't like realize what they all, accomplished in their lifetime until they're gone. And that's really an unfortunate thing. But um, as someone who did it with class, like Hank Aaron's one of the best.
Yeah.
I don't know like how
I'll,
you feel with that, but
well, I just know for the long he's to me played in an era that just it was pretty difficult to succeed.
Yeah.
But came out obviously leading MLB in home runs for the longest time until his record was, I want to say, unfortunately broken. Got to give credit. I don't think steroids really makes an impact of being able to make eye contact and hand-eye coordination to hit a ball 400 feet. But he did it in a time where,
exactly. As someone who kind of started to pave the way for someone like Barry Bonds.
Yeah, exactly.
To take that. And I really don't think like I think that it happens. It's not like this is, I don't know how I want to say that. Regardless, like as I'm like looking through this magazine, just like reading about him, he was, when Hank Aaron was 14, he saw Jackie Robinson speak in 1948, and he describes this moment that he's on at the bus station to go to play for the Indianapolis Clowns. He loved to play baseball, but this was the most lonely he's felt. And growing up in a really poor rural neighborhood in Mobile, Alabama, and to become the home run king is a feat in and of itself. But to do it how he did it, I have a Bud Selig bobblehead that I keep on my desk, and he was really good friends with Henry Aaron. And for the longest time, Bud Selig said he's super underrated. I think his consistency, staying away from the media because he didn't trust them. Even there's an article in here about, let me find it. Howard Bryant was going to write a biography on Hank Aaron, and Hank Aaron was just skeptical. He asked him, how long is it going to be? He stayed out of the limelight in a time that someone, like him, paving the way for black athletes in the years to come is him. Like I said, the way he did it and the diligence and the consistency is just really admirable. And a lot of times in today, especially, people have a hard time staying out of, the hot sports shows or, things like that. And to see someone do it that has ties to Milwaukee. And I was talking to my dad about him a little bit before, and it was funny. My grandpa used to park cars for at County Stadium, and he ended up having to drive Hank Aaron's wife Billy home one night because they must have drove to the park together, and Hank Aaron wanted to go out with the boys after, so his wife, at the time, didn't drive, so my grandpa ended up having to drive her home. But I don't know. I think, like you said, the steroid era is influential in a way. But I also was watching a mini documentary on him. Evidently it was on public television the other morning. And, the city of Atlanta kind of didn't realize what they had in front of them until it got really close, it got really, really close breaking the record of Babe Ruth. I will say when the Braves moved to Atlanta, there was a lot of hype surrounding it. But again, that's the Deep South. You have an African-American player who, like we said, tries to stay out of that because, undoubtedly him and Jackie Robinson, they were playing cards like before his MLB debut. And he's like, they talked about what to do if someone, calls you a certain name or, throws at you and things like that. And, it's just a really dark time in baseball history, but also you can also look at it as uplifting and inspiring for a lot of people. But yeah, I like I said, it sucks that a death, and we lost a lot of good baseball players in the last, year.
Yeah.
Bob Gibson, some of those people we talked about, Joe Morgan, it's part of life, but
I'm quickly looking at, Baseball Reference, as many people do, and, looking up a player and just what they meant for the game, obviously. And we were talking about paving the way, but if I'm reading this correctly, with the exception of his first and last year in the league, he was in the All-Star game. Yeah. Every season he played.
And his rookie year got cut short because of a broken ankle. And then he never was on the then disabled list, now the injured list. Again.
And so here you have somebody, an extreme expert in his craft. Like, for me, one of the best to ever do it. One of the best to ever lace him up. He clearly provided that icon, whether he wanted to be or not, because like you said, he wanted to stay out of the limelight.
Yeah.
But he did something for a sport that was divided. And I think it mirrors into things that today, people need to be an icon, even when they don't want it, or even when they don't expect to be.
Yeah.
It just happens. And to bring something as divided as baseball was, watching films and hearing interviews and excerpts from players of the past and stuff like that, how segregated as well as how just racially biased the game was.
Yeah.
I'm using 42. I know it's a cinematography, example of it. Yeah. Sure. But just the scenes in that movie itself showcase, unfortunately, how bad it was. And for an individual like Hank Aaron to come out of a place as desolate as well as lower income as he did, to become the home run king, to pave the way for African Americans in the sport as well as in everything, it's incredible. Yeah. It's one of those heartwarming moments that you could say, I'm proud to be a previous member of a sport that realized that there was a problem and needed to change. And people like Hank Aaron did that. So.
Yeah, he also, like you said, growing up in Alabama, it's crazy because his mom would have to call him in from playing baseball because members of the KKK were, marching down the streets or whatever. And that's, in the 40s, right? That's not all that far removed. That's less than 100 years, and I don't know. I just think it's funny, the image someone takes, like that gets projected onto them, like their conceptions of what you are. That's really confusing. But like America, wanted him or put him in a spot that he didn't necessarily want to be in, and he still did his thing, and he never really tried to hit home runs. He said like the race was really tiring at the end of it, right? And he just kind of wanted to do what he could to make the team win. And
well, the guy hit 755 home runs and had a batting average of 305. So
and he's look at the last few years of his career, not the last two or the last, did he play 2 in Milwaukee to end it?
Yeah, 75, 76.
So ignore those two because those were kind of down years for him. But he's, almost 40 years old, and how many home runs was he hitting? Like looking
he was hitting
72, 73, 74.
Yeah, he was hitting 34, 40, 47, 38, 74. It was kind of the decline.
And say what you will about the baseball at that time and the pitching and things like that. Like, you still have to hit the ball out of the yard, right?
Still got to put a bat on ball and drive that thing at least 330 in the corner. Like from a person experiencing the sport, it is not as easy as the couch quarterbacks, even though that's not the same sport, say. So.
It's applicable, right? We talk about it all the time.
Oh yeah.
Incredible person, did so much for the game, and like we said, underrated. And there's a couple key losses that the Milwaukee Braves endured that kind of solidified that he wouldn't be in this limelight, because him and Eddie Matthews were quite the Bass Bros in Milwaukee for years. And again, but yeah, like you said, it's unfortunate that death kind of brings us to reflecting on that, but I think it's a testament to what he was able to accomplish in his life. But
yeah, I agree.
Again, we thank you for listening. We'll come back and hopefully we have a guest. We got some stuff lined up. We just gotta work out scheduling, and everybody's busy. So Austin, nice merch.
Thanks. About time. I have the overshirt, and then the undershirt's a sweatshirt. So
nice.
I'm doubling it up for
You're trying to make up for your
yeah.
But Once again, we appreciate you. We'll see you next time.